And now on to chapter 6. "I wish the McCready would hurry up and take all these people away," said Susan presently. I'm getting horribly cramped." "And what is that filthy smell of camphor?" said Edmund. "I expect the pockets of these clothes are full of it," said Susan, "to keep away moths." "There's something sticking to my back," said Peter. "And isn't it cold?" said Susan. "Now that you mention it, it is cold," said Peter. "And hang it all, it's wet too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet. It's getting wetter every minute," and he struggled to his feet. "Let's get out," said Edmund. "They've gone." "Oh," said Peter suddenly, and everyone asked her about the matter. "Oh," said Peter suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. "I'm sitting against a tree," said Susan, "and look, it's getting light over there." "By Jove, you're right," said Peter, and look, there and there. It's trees all around, and this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all." And now there's no mistaking it. All 4 children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats were coats hanging on pegs, and in front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. "I apologize for not believing you," he said. "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and they did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" "Do?" said Peter. "Why, we go and explore the wood, of course." "Ugh," said Susan, stepping her feet. "It's pretty cold, and what about putting on some of these coats?" "They're not ours," said Peter doubtfully. "Well, I'm sure no one would mind," said Susan. "It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't take them out of the wardrobe." "I never thought of that, Sue," said Peter. "Of course, now that you put it that way, I see. No one could say you had bagged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe." They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so that they came down to their heels, but looked more like royal robes than coats, and when they'd put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the other looked better in their new get-ups and more suitable to the landscape. "We can pretend we are Arctic explorers," said Lucy. "This is going to be exciting enough without pretending," said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There was a heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if it might be more snow before night. "I say," said Edmund presently, "oughtn't we to be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we're aiming for the lamppost?" He had forgotten for a moment that he must pretend never to have been in the woods before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away, and everybody stopped. Everybody stared at him, and Peter whistled. "So you really were here," he said. "That time Lou said she met you in here, and you made out she was telling lies." There was a dead silence. "Well, of all the poisonous little beasts," said Peter, and shrugging his shoulders, he said no more. There seemed indeed no more to say, and presently the 4 resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, "I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs." "Where are we going anyway?" said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. "I think Lou ought to be the leader," said Peter. "Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou?" "What about going to see Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "He's the nice fawn that I told you about." Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stamping their feet. Lucy proved to be a good leader. At first she wondered whether or not she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree in one place and a stump in another, and brought them to where the ground began to be uneven, into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken to bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the doorway and was heaped on the floor, mixed with something black, which turned out to be the charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and then stamped on it. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed to shreds with a knife. "This is a pretty good washout," said Edmund. "Not much good coming here." "What is this?" said Peter, stooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper that had been nailed to the carpet on the floor. "It's something written on it," said Susan. "Yes, I think there is," said Peter, "but I can't read it in all this light. Let's get out into the open air." And they went out into the daylight and crowded around Peter as he read out the following words. "The former occupant of these premises, the Fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and waiting his trial on a charge of high treason against her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc. Also of comforting her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies, and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Mogram, the captain of the secret police. Long live the Queen." The children stared at each other. "I don't know I'm going to like this place at all," said Susan. "Who is this Queen Lou?" said Peter. "Do you know anything about her?" "She isn't a real queen at all," said Lucy. "She's a horrible witch. The White Witch. Everyone, all the woods people hate her. She has made it an enchantment over the whole country so that it is always winter here and never Christmas." "I wonder if there's any point in going on," said Susan. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if it won't be much fun either. It's getting colder every minute, and I've brought nothing to eat. What about just going home?" "Oh, but we can't," said Lucy suddenly. "Don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It's all on my account that this poor fawn has got into this trouble. And he hid me from the witch and showed me the way back. That's what it means by comforting the Queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We simply must try to rescue him." "A lot we could do," said Edmund. "We haven't even got anything to eat." "Oh, shut up, you," said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. "What do you think, Susan?" "I've a horrible feeling that Lou is right," said Susan. "I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come, but I think we must try to do something for Mr. whatever his name is. I mean the fawn." "That's what I feel too," said Peter. "I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back and getting some larder, only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting into this country again once you've got out of it. I think we'll just have to go on." "So do I," said both girls. "If only we knew where the poor chap was imprisoned," said Peter. They were all still wondering what to do next. Then Lucy said, "Look, there's a robin with a redbreast, and it's the first bird I've seen here. I say, I wonder if birds can talk in Narnia. It almost looks as if it wanted to say something." Then she turned to the robin and said, "Please, can you tell us where Mr. Tumnus the fawn has been taken to?" As she said this, she took a step toward the bird. It at once flew away, but only as far as the next tree. And there it perched and looked at them very hard, as if to understand all they had said. Almost without noticing that they had done so, the four children went a step or two nearer to it. At this, the robin flew away again to the next tree, and once more looked at them very, very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. "Do you know," said Lucy, "I really believe he means us to follow him." "I have an idea he does," said Susan. "What do you think, Peter?" "Well, we might as well try it," said Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly and kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them. but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way it led them on, slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently the clouds parted, and overhead, in the winter sun that came out, all the snow around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about an hour and a half, with the two girls in front, when Edmund said to Peter, "If you're not still so high and mighty to talk to me, I've got something to say which you'd better listen to." "What is it?" said Peter. "Hush, not so loud," said Edmund. "There's no good frightening the girls. But have you realized what we're doing?" "What?" said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. "We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side the bird is on? Why shouldn't it be leading us into a trap?" "Well, that's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, you know. They're good birds in all the stories I've ever read. I'm sure a robin would not be on the wrong side. If it comes to that, what is the right side? You know that the fawns are in the right and the queen, well, yes, you know you've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong. We don't really know anything about it. The fawn saved Lucy. He said he saved Lucy, but how do we know? How do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of the way home from here?" "Great Scott," said Peter. "I hadn't thought of that. And no chance for dinner either," said Edmund. That's the end of chapter 6.